So essentially what we have Vladimir Putin, Narendra Modi, and Xi Jinping in China right now presenting a rival front to the US. At least that's what the newspaper are reporting. China leader will lay out Beijing ambition for an alternative international order when he welcomes his counterparts from Russia, India, and Iran to a security forum where he will seek to offer a contrast to U.S. President Donald Trump's global stewardship. Well, I did tell you about that. I did tell you, hello everyone, and welcome to the broadcast. And as we feared, these people are. I told you they were going to get together, and they are right now. All three of them are now in China talking. Okay. And so what is the point of this broadcast? Well, in the middle of all this, you need to understand that the rupee, which is the Indian currency, is taking a hit. The industry is taking a hit. The tariffs at 50% is starting to bite. It's biting. But he's over there and he's talking to them. So let me make a couple of points first of all, right? So India has a problem. India has a problem is because they are basically caught. India is a democracy, in case you did not know, and they are caught between the U.S. and China. Okay, but right now they're over in China. The 50% tariffs on India, is this a foolish or is it desperate? And that's kind of the point I want to make to you today, because it's going to impact you. It's going to impact you because obviously the world order is changing. You may not feeling today, but you will feeling. And it's happening under our eyes. Now, of course, you will hear that essentially, well, he's leaving and he's going over there because the U.S. administration has been mean to him. Okay, you got to stop. You have to stop reading and listening to this train of thought, because these individuals don't have friends, they don't have foes, they have interests. That's all they have, okay? And that's something that's important for you to grasp, that you need to understand that they have interests. And obviously, those interests are going to interfere with your, believe it or not, interest. And I will explain to you why. So essentially, right now, the big news is that the U.S. is charging 50% tariffs on to India, and it's sticking. Have you heard any kind of discussion? Have you heard any kind of meeting? No, it is happening as we speak. These people are serious, and the U.S. is very serious as well. So what does the U.S. really want? Well, the U.S. basically wants India to stop buying oil from Ukraine. Not. That's what they tell you, so that you could understand and you could relate to the war. And it's very simple to understand. Stop buying the oil. Stop buying the oil, because you're buying the oil from Ukraine, from Russia, and you're helping the war to go on. That is not a nice thing to do. So stop doing it. India gets almost 40% since 2022 from its oil from Russia. Okay? 40% of his oil. You want them to stop buying tomorrow. Are you serious? That is not going to happen. Okay? They are not going to do that because it just doesn't make any sense. It is too complex. It is too expensive. They are not going to do it. That is not going to do it. Now, so what are they looking for? Well, essentially, India, right, wants to work with the U.S. because the U.S. is a democracy like India. China is not. So they would rather deal with the U.S. But frankly, what you will notice is because India, for the U.S., is the only country with comparable scale and geography to constrain China in Asia. You need to understand that all of this, right, has to do with China. So U.S. versus China, really, at the end of the day. And two big blocks, two major power, very strong on all from they are their own strength. Obviously, China is moving a lot faster ahead than the U.S., but still the U.S. is very strong. So they're trying to manage their interests and making sure that their interests are protected. So what do? Well, basically, the U.S. goes to India. In fact, the U.S. has been going to India for not just because of the 50% of the tariff. They have been going over there for quite some time, right? They've been discussing and discussing and discussing quite a bit since the beginning of the year, quite frankly. They've been having a lot of discussion with India, but it really has not gone anywhere. They have not been able to make any inroads with India. So what does the U.S. want from India? They want them to really stop, buying oil. No, it's nothing to do with the oil, because there's no way India is going to stop buying oil. Where they're going to get 40% of their oil, they're going to spend a lot more money because they're getting discounted oil. So that is not really what's happening. That would be too expensive. Okay. What they're really doing, they're trying to get into the Indian market. And that is a little bit more complicated. That's going to take a little bit more time, because frankly, what the U.S. wants, the U.S. actually wants to get into the Indian market, specifically the agriculture market. They want, and this is something they've been after for quite some times, but they just can't do it. They've been going back and forth quite a bit, but it's not working. And the reason it's not working is because, frankly, the U.S. has a huge trade deficit with India, but what they've been doing is they've been trying to get into the because don't forget the India wants to make India great again. And the way they're doing it is they are tariffing 39% against anyone that wants to come into India in terms of the agriculture. I mean, the U.S. trade negotiation have run into repeated deadlocks because both sides have deep structural disagreements. Okay, the Washington has pressed New Delhi to open its dairy, its poultry, and its agricultural market more widely. India's position, they say, I can't do that. 40% of the people working in India, 40% works in the farms, in the fields. If they're going to, and frankly, we're talking, 4 or 5 cows, while in the U.S. it's like 2 or 3% works in the field. In India, it's 40%. And it's basically what's keeping Modi in power. These people will vote for someone else if you have them compete with the U.S. So that is very difficult. India's position, citing small farmer livelihood, food security, and cultural sensitivity. This issue has been the single biggest obstacle to past and current deal. It is not Ukraine. That is the problem. Okay. Steel and aluminum. India has sought exemption from Section 232 tariffs, which has to do with security, meaning I need steel in the U.S. If we're going to import steel from India, then we're going to tax it because we need to bring this business back in the U.S. because we need steel to build, weapons and tanks or whatever. The U.S. position, Washington wants wider tariff cuts across sectors, but is reluctant to grant carve-outs. I don't cut it across, but I still want to keep my Section 232, which, by the way, the Supreme Court cannot touch. So I want to keep that. Well, I would like you to take it out. No, I want to keep it. New Delhi argues its tariffs protect domestic industries and provide strategic leverage. So at the end of the day, don't be, please understand the situation. When you hear that the U.S. is too protectionist, well, what about India? Right? They want to protect their farmers. Nothing wrong with that. It's in their interest to protect the farmer, and it's in the interest of the U.S. to protect its steel industry. The thing is, all right, so what do we do now? Okay? And of course, the U.S. has a concern. The U.S. runs a large trade deficit with India and insist on greater market access for U.S. industrial goods. I gotta sell you some stuff. You can't just have such huge deficit. It's not good to run such a huge trade deficit, because at the end of the day, all you're doing is you're sending cash, and you forget to make how to make these things, and you become dependent on other countries. Okay, India's concern is that its own ballooning trade deficit with China, and fears exposing domestic producers further while trying to reduce Chinese dependence. You see what's happening? They all have the same thing. They all have the same issue. The U.S. is pushing for IP protection, commerce liberalization. New Delhi prioritized digital sovereignty. The Trump administration, new tariffs on Indian goods harden India's negotiating stance. Well, the U.S. is pressing and said, listen, we're not talking. You're not listening to me, right? And if you're not listening, then it's 50%. Now, of course, you could say, well, is the U.S. really foolish for doing what they do? Or they are desperate? And the fact that all three of them right now, right? All three of them are right now in India, in China, right? They're talking. Right? All of them are over there having a good time, making deals, discussing, talking, and that's going to be a problem for the U.S. But the reason they're over there, it's not like they are good friends. Obviously, China is taking advantage of this situation. They say, why don't you come to me? Why don't you be my friend for a change? Well, I mean, you need to understand one thing. Okay, you need to do a little bit of a history. But you have to understand that Modi is very cautious and careful with China. You need to understand that the Chinese and the Indians have fought almost 4 wars already. They have never fought any war with the U.S. But India has fought many wars with China. Well, why? Well, because of the border. The border. Look, they're next to each other. They are next to each other, and that's a problem. They have fought many wars together, and and in addition to have a huge trade deficit with China, they have had many wars together, and that is a problem for India. Because frankly, well, they are, a little upset at the U.S. Getting close to China is a bit of a problem from India standpoint, because it is there's some key risks there for India to be close to China. What kind of risk I'm talking about? Well, first of all, there's a huge trade imbalance between China and India, approximately $100 billion, prompting Delhi to push for self-reliance and diversity of trade resources. Self-reliant, exactly what the U.S. is trying to do, quite frankly, trying to be more reliant. The same thing India is trying to do. That is nothing hugely unusual here. Okay, don't think for a second that for some reason the U.S. the U.S. administration is doing something horrible and very unusual. No. This is something that they've been doing for quite some time. Okay, so there's economic dependence and strategic leverage. Right, there's ongoing territorial and sovereignty disputes. The border tensions remains unresolved between China and India. Despite agreement on patrolling and some de-escalation, the Sino-Indian border dispute remains unresolved, with potential for renewed military standoffs, and they have fought a war over this. there's infrastructure driven frictions. China, believe it or not, we're talking about China's infrastructure, for example. Like, for example, they have a mega dam project, which I believe I talked about that in a previous live, on the in between the China and India, poses ecological and livelihood risk downstream in India. India has called for transparency and resume hydrological data sharing. I mean, what you understand is that China is building this huge, humongous dam infrastructure project. Why are they doing it? Because China is trying to become independent in terms of its energy production, and that's why they're doing it. They are basically taking the dam and getting that information, getting the dam from the not in India, but very close, and they're saying, hey, this is going to impact us in some fashion. I'm a little concerned what you're doing here. Number three reason why India is a little bit concerned about China is ocean mapping that doubles as military intelligence. Chinese research vessels, possibly with military objectives, have conducted covert operation in the Indian Ocean, including seafloor mapping near Indian waters. What are they really doing? I mean, there's encirclements with the strings of pearls. China expanding network of ports and facility across the Indian Ocean may encircle India and threaten its maritime influence and security. Is China giving a bear hug to India right now? That is the question. Geopolitical realignment and U.S. relationship. Strategic uncertainty amid U.S. backlash. Risk of Indo-Pacific cohesion. A growing economic tilt toward China may strain India standing in coalition like the Quad, creating fissures in efforts to present a unified strategic plan. Don't forget, the Quad that we're talking about, the Quad, is the U.S., India, Australia. The India and Japan is trying to make its own wall against China. But now, with Modi over in China, that's not going to be very helpful. This is going to be very upsetting. While the current diplomatic thaw may offer short-term relief and trade opportunities, India needs to remain vigilant. So it's not as simple as, oh, China is upset, India is upset at the U.S., so they're going to go over there to China. Be careful. And I'm saying the U.S. knows this, and India knows that as well. And so does China. Reliance on China, whether economic, environmental, and strategic, can invite vulnerabilities that undermine national autonomy and regional security. Maintaining a balanced approach, growing diversified partnership, and safeguarding strategic ecosystem remain essential for India's long-term interests. So you see, it's all about the interest. They need to be careful as to who are they getting close to. And the U.S. is saying, you know what? You don't, fine, go ahead, do what you have to do, but be careful. Be careful, because you're getting very close to China again, and there are consequences. A country with whom you have fought 4 wars. That is the problem that we are having right now between those two countries. And the thing is, obviously, the U.S. is asking India, well, forget the farmers' lobby. Just start buying my product. I cannot buy your product. I cannot buy your wheat. I cannot buy your agricultural product. Otherwise, I am going to be out of a job. Fine, then go to China then. Be careful, though. Okay. At the end of the day, you need to realize that India is the world's largest democracy as well. Can they fit well with the Chinese way of doing things? Because like I said, getting close to China is risky. They have fought, a full-scale war in 1962, and serious clashes 1967, 1987, 2017, 2020. So what India is doing right now, Modi is playing both sides. He's trying to extract concession without overcommitting on one way or the other. And I'm sure that the Chinese see him coming. What he did with the U.S. is not that foolish. And over there, frankly, it's a sidebar conversation that you need to figure out exactly what's happening. That is the thing. And that's a question that you need to worry about most of the time. You need to wonder, what are these people doing? Now, of course, what we're saying is, how does this all, how does this all ends up? And that's a question. Now you have to be careful. You have to be very careful, because in the U.S., you have to deal with India still. You can't just ignore India completely. You could do 50% tariffs. Basically, what you're saying is you're closing everything having to do with. So the 50% tariffs apply to gold, the jewelry business, not the pharmaceutical or the steel, but it's a jewelry business. Anything having to do with clothing and things like that. So, but at the end of the day, for the U.S., quite frankly, it's not a big deal. It's a big deal in the sense that you're losing a friend. But not a friend, but a good partner. Another democracy in the middle of Asia. You're losing a foothold there, because once you lose that, then you got China plus India plus Russia. The world has moved past bipolar world. Multipolar world is new stance. That everyone with dignity, everyone is trying to safeguard its own. Exactly. And you have to be very careful the information that you're reading, because they make it the news is tilted as if they're talking to a 5-year-old. Oh, look, the Chinese are so happy. They're bringing over the Indians because they're upset at the U.S. administration, because the administration wants to give them 50% tariffs. You really think it's that simple? And because they want them to stop fighting the war in Ukraine. It has nothing to do with that. It has everything to do with the fact that the U.S. wants to lower its trade deficit. He says, fine, then buy something for me then. What do you want to buy? Right? You don't want to buy anything. You want me to carry a huge trade deficit. And you yourself don't want to carry a huge trade deficit with China, but it's okay for us to do it. No, that can't be anymore. Now, of course, the concern that I have when I see the U.S. attitude is, or the U.S. strategy, is that they know it's political suicide for Modi to actually say, fine, I'm going to go against my farmers and I'm going to import your wheats and your soy and all that. It will be political suicide. So you expect them to do that? Yes, he has to do something, because my interest lies in the fact that the U.S. needs to lower its trade deficit, the same way you want to lower your trade deficit, because everybody has a huge trade deficit with India. Okay? Yeah, that's why incentivize the industry to bring back in the U.S. Or at least then buy from us then, right? Then buy from us. Don't export to us. Buy from us. Okay? No? Okay, well then, if that's the case, then you're on your own. Now, like I said, the strategy, I'm concerned about the strategy of the U.S. is because what they're asking is almost an impossibility, and yet they're asking for it. So either the U.S. is not foolish, but they're desperate. They say, listen, I'm not going to sit there and have a huge trade deficit. Then let's not do any business then, if that's what it comes to. Let's not do business. Right? And if you want to do business, fine, that's 50% tariffs. At least we make some money. Okay. And it's important for the U.S. to do that, because with what's happening with the Supreme Court that's going after the tariffs, not those steel tariffs, but the emergency tariffs, that could weaken the hand of the U.S., frankly, in this negotiation. But if you want to get close to China, go right ahead, but you know the risks. You had 4 wars with these people. What kind of information are you going to share with them as you get closer? We call it security. Is China your friend because it's your friend, or because it knows that you were my friend, quote unquote? Does best by playing both sides, extracting concession without overcommitting on the other one. We shall see. We shall see how this ends up. But right now, it looks a bit problematic for India. And now you have to understand also, so that we're clear, that even though the rupee is falling and they have some issues, you need to realize one thing is that India is growing at 6-7% a year. Okay. So, I mean, the US is growing at 3%, they're growing at 6%. With a 50% hit, maybe that's going to lower a little bit their growth, but still, I mean, they're doing fine. And of course, let me remind you that India's GDP, and because we're only talking about the industrial sector here, right? Hypothetically, if the US becomes a manufacturing hub, giving present infrastructure ecosystem, price of goods are going to skyrocket. Well, and we are starting to see that already. Prices are going to start moving up. Now, of course, I mean, when we say prices, again, we have to be very careful with the way we talk here and what they're telling you. We are mostly talking about industrial goods here. Okay, the tariffs hits the industrial goods. That's number one. You need to understand industrial goods in the U.S. The industries in the U.S. is about 20% of the GDP, 20% of the country. 80% are services. That is not being impacted. So it's not like everything is, Netflix is going to go up, everything is going to be very expensive. It's a catastrophe. And that's why I want to make sure you need to understand what you're listening to, what you hear. As far as the stock market, I hate to say it, but that's 10% of the stock market are industrial. And frankly, right now, they're not driving anything as far as the S&P or anything like that. It's only 10% of the S&P. And mostly right now is being driven by the tech firms. So service is 80%. Remember, tech is industrial is 20%. And those tariffs are hitting the industrial section. As far as India, it's kind of the same thing. The service sector in India is 57%. Around 60%, let's say, they're not being touched with the tariffs. The industrial sector, yes, it's like between 20 and 25%, 25 and 27. Let's say 25% of GDP. Manufacturing, construction. Hello, Mohammed. How are you? So, agriculture and allied activities is 17%. That's the one that the administration, yes, administration wanted to go after. Say, well, can I get some of that? You're 18% of your GDP, but that's 40% of the workforce in India. 40%. I want you to learn something today. 40% of the workforce in India is basically agriculture, but it's about 20% of the GDP. That's what the administration wants to go after the US, and they say, no, you can't touch this. Well, okay, I guess you're protecting your industry as well, right? It's not unusual then for a country to do that. Correct. So really, we're talking about the industrial sector. That's the one that's going to get hit. Manufacturing, steel, textile, pharmaceutical is out because the U.S. gets most of its pharmaceutical from India and China, so they don't want to tax that. Tariffs that. Construction, some mining, it's really textile, automobiles, and anything having to do with jewelry and things like that. That is going to be impacted. That is being impacted right now. What does this mean? Well, what this means at the end of the day is that India really has its work cut out for it. India is still dependent on the U.S., but it is depending on, it's not really depending on China of much of anything. Very low dependency on defense, moderate dependence on technology, no dependence on energy, maybe some solar. Education very low. Not many Indian students go to China. So at the end of the day, it's all very red on China. India doesn't have such huge amount of contact with China. Maybe they're going over to China to kind of upset the U.S. to see Not upset, but show them, listen, you're forcing me in a direction. And if you think about the position that the U.S. has, which is to say, yeah, I know it's tough, but it's tough for me too. So you got to make a decision. And this is not the previous administration where they kind of wanted to be friend with you, but keep it going. While you're running such a large trade deficit, you cannot run a large trade deficit. There's nothing wrong with that. This is not unique to the U.S. They all have huge trade deficit with China, including India. These amount of trade deficit cannot go on forever. This needs to stop. And that's what they're trying to do. Now, are they going to be able to do it? That's the question. Can they manage to have a can they manage to do that? That's the question. So right now, everyone is in China and they're having a good discussion and they're having their meeting. And what's very important is what's happening on the sidebar. That is what you need to worry about. What is it that they're going to decide? Now, of course, you need to also understand that this thing that's happening in China is not this. Oh well, that's because obviously they're upset with the 50%. No, you have to understand. In October 2024, India and China reached a critical agreement on border patrol arrangement in October of last year. These people are playing chess, and I want you to start thinking like them. Okay. The Chinese foreign minister visited India in August. Okay, that was recent. In January of 2025, almost 5 years, there were no direct flight between China and India. Not really the best of friends. Something is going on there, but not anymore. Somehow, January, they say, you know what? Why don't we stop this? And basically, they reconnected travelers and business exchanges. India is also easing business visa procedures for executives from major Chinese companies. Let's do business. Let's start traveling. Let's start talking cultural and spiritual ties. In April 2025. Now remember, when you do something in April, I mean, you have to plan it from like 3 months before, right? April 2025, India reopened a temple, a sacred pilgrimage through Tibet, strengthening shared spiritual heritage. Now it seems that China is saying, you know what? Let's be friends. Forget all this border thing and traveling thing. Come over, get your visa, come and look at the temple, right? After all, we are next to each other. Then the Prime Minister Modi is visiting right now for the first time in 7 years to attend the SCO summit, signaling elevated diplomatic engagement. They've been building it up. Of course, as they've built up, the discussion with the U.S. has gone down, right? But at the end of the day, you are doing business with the countries that you have had one war and a bunch of, fighting for the past, since the 60s. Okay? And on top of that, the gold of the gold, the most important one, China has opened up exports on rare earth minerals and magnets, which they have kind of started to close towards the U.S., quite frankly. And they even share strategic space amid shifting U.S. relation, the U.S. trade pressures. Now, if you are the Chinese, right, and you're seeing what's happening in the U.S., what do? Well, you basically let it happen. Of course, you could question if what the U.S. is doing really is too much, right? Collaborate, conclude. That's how the previous administration worked. Now this administration is just dictating. Yeah, but yes, that's the issue, right? I was going to actually bring up that point. Is this a way to work with the Indian people, right? With Modi, is this? Do you really think that this approach is actually working, right? I mean, do you really think that by coercing someone in that fashion and by being rude. I mean, some of the things that Trump said about Modi, let them have their small countries, the oil. In fact, the oil is not even using the oil, is reselling the oil that he's getting from, like you're a thief, basically. You're taking the oil at 30% off and you're reselling it to someone else. Um, the thing is, yeah, but so what did Biden do really, in 2024? What did the previous administration real? Did they do anything? Yeah, no. They know that they needed to do something with India, but the approach of the previous administration was softer, was not as forward. I mean, obviously there was no tariffs. They were talking, but because they know, the U.S. knows that India is indispensable in several overlapping areas. You need to counterbalance China in the Indo-Pacific, right? India is the only country with comparable scale and geography to constrain China in Asia. So you don't want to lose India. It's not so much the trade, right? It's really, you don't want to lose that. In the Quad, the Quad that the U.S. is building, which is U.S., India, Japan, and Australia, is the anchor in China's western flank. Without India, this Indo-Pacific strategic risks being East Asia-centric and leave the Indian Ocean open to Chinese dominance. India is now the largest arms importer in the world and increasingly co-develops technology with the U.S. U.S. forces gain valuable military access. So the U.S. needs India. It's very important to keep India close. But unfortunately, the previous administration probably didn't do enough, and this one is doing too much. To the point, what did the previous administration do? Right? Well, it was studied and it was multi-layered during 2025. It was defense, diplomacy. I mean, they work with them. There was an early engagement. This Quad discussion, right? Biden elevated the Quad to the leader level. Modi joined the first Quad leader. The Quad is kind of like the BRICS. You see what's happening? The BRICS and the Quad. In 2021, then Modi joined Biden in April 2021 for another summit. There was some support for COVID. The Biden administration provided vaccine, raw materials, and aid during the India devastating 2021 second wave. There was some defense and strategic cooperation. There was high-level visits. Modi visited Washington in 2023. Despite strategic warmth, Biden and Modi spared on trade irritants. Still, Biden was having discussion. Maybe the approach was different, but they still had the same issue that the current administration have. You have to be careful and don't frame it in a critical frame of mind towards this current administration. You need to frame it as understanding the situation. Otherwise, it's you bringing that to one person and you say, well, it's his fault. The other guy didn't do that or didn't do anything. No. This is the U.S. They need to protect their interests. And it's very difficult, right? India at that time resisted U.S. pressures to fully open agriculture and e-commerce. That was then. Even Biden was trying to open the agriculture. So you got to let us, we got to redo. And they said, no, I don't want it. I don't want to do it. I don't want to. While the U.S. pushed back on India's data localization and protectionist tariffs. At that time, there were tariffs. No, the previous administration didn't do anything. Was it a mistake? Well, this one is doing it. Is it a mistake? Well, you got to do something, right? If you don't do anything, what do you think is going to happen? You cannot run a trade deficit forever between the trade deficit in India, the trade deficit in China. You're going to, and it's exactly what the current administration is forgetting who the administration is. Any administration, they're having the same issue. Now, the question is this the right approach? And obviously, based on what we heard from the Supreme Court, they say, whoa, wait a second here. You can't tariff the entire world with that Congress. You are not a king. That's basically what they told the current administration. Now, having said that, that's on one side of the tariffs, not the 332, not the security tariffs that you can't go after, but the emergency tariffs that the administration has been using. That's going to be a lot of damage. That is going to the Supreme Court on October 14th or so. That's probably not going to work. They're probably going to say, like they told Biden, president, you cannot forgive and you remember that probably, you cannot forgive the loan to the student loans just like that. You can't. These are federal driven loans that you cannot just forget them just like that. You don't have that kind of power without Congress. And Trump, you too, you cannot decide that this is an emergency and you're tariffing 120 country because of emergency. Give the money back. So what the U.S. is doing right now, and I'm sure they had probably a pretty good idea this was going to happen, and that's why the U.S. administration right now is shifting. And what they're doing is they're saying, well, maybe I'm going to start focusing more on the security tariffs. That I have power over. That they cannot control me. So that means I'm going to go after the security, pharmaceutical, semiconductors. I have the right to do all these things, and you cannot stop me. What else do you want me to do? We can't talk these people to death. Nobody's listening. They're doing their own business. Because India, frankly, nothing wrong with that. India has its own interest. The U.S. has its own interest as well. Okay? The present administration is throwing power games instead of playing diplomatic. Present military posture, yes, that's true. You could make that point, Arctic, that they are being obtuse, that they're being coercive in the way that they are doing it. But they are running out of time. The U.S. doesn't have 3 years to negotiate one agreement and 3 years to negotiate another agreement with China and 3 years with India and then Taiwan and Switzerland. The U.S. does not have that kind of time. The reason I'm telling you is because right now, in the next 5 to 7 years, the U.S. is going to lose the ability to compete effectively with semiconductors. The ability to, they probably lost the ability to compete with the rare earth minerals because it would take 10 to 15 years to start. They have, it's in the U.S., it's in India, it's everywhere, it's in Europe. It's just nobody wants to dig for it. And if you want to dig for it, then it's going to be messy. And then you're going to have to get the pollution, which China was very happy to get. And now, come to me now. Right? Trump wants the manufacturing sector, but he needs to build factories, railway track, electricity, and all. Unfortunately, that yes, but that's going to take too long, right? And I think what the administration is trying to do right now is they're saying, you know what, invest in this country. Then forget, just send me cash, send me a fund, and that's what for example, they want $400 billion from Taiwan, right, for these semiconductors. And they're trying to do that. And Trump has given India an excuse to restore relation with Russia and India. Many think this is big thing, but China and Russia are very poor economies now. What? Well, the Indian economy is up. I don't know if, Russia, India is growing at 6-7%. China, not. Russia, no. Yeah, I agree. But these countries are doing fast. Take it granted that a block will never happen. The rig block, in the Indian view. Yeah, the concern is that this is going to be there's going to be a lot of damage because not that so much India is giving an excuse to restore relations. I think what it is, India is trying to play both sides, Chinese and the U.S. But they have to realize the administration is not that kind of administration. They're not going to see that very well what they're doing with China. They say, okay, if that's what you want, then you go with them. You go deal with China then. Forget you. And that's what I think is happening. I think because they have been trying very hard to get, since the beginning of this year, to go back and forth with India to negotiate, to trying to see, is there a way we could get closer on these issues? Can we get some of the agriculture? No. Yeah, well, I mean, then what? So we keep it the way it is. We can't keep it the way it is. This is a huge trade deficit. That is not going to happen. I like you. I want you to be my friend in Asia. You're part of the Quad, but we have to deal. No, I cannot. I got to protect my agriculture. Well, then what are we going to do? And I think they realize that they're not going anywhere. And then on top of that, he had it just the reasoning of the oil and Ukraine. He said, well, you know what? That's it. That's 50%. And go away. We can't deal with you anyway, so let's close. And you know what? Let me push you with China, and you see what's going to happen over there. Knowing that China has fought India. Full-scale war in 1962. The U.S. and China and India have never had a war. So you have this history that you kill some people, you kill Indian people. And several times in serious clashes, 1967, 1987, 2017, 2020. These people have fought wars and now they're the best of friends. You see how you came in, the people dancing and the music and all that and the big red carpet or whatever. Be careful what you want because you may get it. My point, I think, is that the U.S. is now not foolish, but they're being desperate. They're desperate. They don't know what to do because you can't get through to this guy. And we are the largest market this platform, and we have never complained about it. Because we know we are not a superpower, and we don't. I guess you're from India. What India wants, it will be our priority. We'll believe, keep our enemy nearer. Well, but at the end of the day, though, the U.S. needs India. Cannot lose India to the Chinese. And India has to be very careful, mostly Modi, right? Yeah, I know you don't want to lose the farmers. Remember, in India, 40% of the population works in fields, which is only 20%. Very inefficient, very backwards. I mean, it's not the most efficient process. But they have jobs and they work and they're trying to be self-reliant. In fact, the Modi is trying to promote self-reliance, the same way U.S. is trying to promote self-reliance. I guess everybody close their doors and you do your own thing. Maybe you don't need anyone else and there's no problem. But can you actually do that? Can you be on your own without knowing anyone else? I mean, yes, if everybody got along, that would be great. Then no. I mean, the U.S. administration has had this issue in the past with the previous administration, and I've been saying all along, all the issues that are being faced today, you need to understand that everything that's happening today is not because of the administration. It's because it's been happening and it was never dealt with, and now it needs to be dealt. The debt needs to be dealt. This administration did not come up with $37 trillion worth of debt. This administration did not create the huge trade deficit, right? This has been happening for years and years, and you've been kind of, let it happen. And if Democrats would have won in the White House, they would have to face it again. At the end of the day, there's somebody like me in the White House that say, okay, well, let's look at the world here and let's see where the risks are. Let's look for the black swan. Because don't forget, you have to be careful. Trade wars have sparked real wars. Because that's the ultimate black swan. Could we have a war? I mean, nobody wins. But then again, when Japan was locked in by the U.S. with the embargo, what do you think happened? The milk packet in India, if we open the U.S. market, we need to set at 15 cents, and farmers will cry like hell, and they'll create a big rift for families. Yes. It is 45. If we open the U.S. market, we need to sell it for 15. And farmer will cry like hell. Yes. The milk market, India sells a lot of milk. Big milk producer. If we open the U.S. market, we will need to sell it at 15. Wow. Okay. And farmers will, yes, of course. Oh, you mean that right now, if you buy milk in India, it's 45 cents. If you let the milk come into India, you will have to sell it at 15 cents. Yeah. Well, no, but but that's the thing. It's not a very efficient market. So maybe what Modi should be doing is maybe trying to get these people jobs away from those farms. Remember, the farms in the U.S. like on average like 320 cattle, but in India it's like 5 cattle. Very inefficient. Then maybe you take them out of the field and put them into factory, so you don't become so dependent on the agriculture, and then you open the agriculture to the U.S., right? Maybe that's what needs to happen. But obviously, Modi doesn't want to touch this because he won't get reelected. 40%, right? The lobby is really strong in India, but it's extremely inefficient. So maybe he should be working on that. I think the U.S. has given up. I think unless they're pushing them towards China, because that's what's happening, right? They're literally pushing China. The company will increase to get more revenue from the farm and need to sell a lower price, and they need to sell rupees. Which is sell, of course. So you have to decide what is in your best interest. Do you want to please your farmer? Fine. Then upset the U.S. and then goes to China. Fine. They will share with you. They will help you. And you see what they're doing, right? I mean, China loves India. First, they what are they really done? They say, okay, we're not going to fight over on the border. Okay, that doesn't take much. We're going to fly flights back and forth. Okay, fine. That doesn't involve much of anything. It's just signing a bunch of papers. We're going to reopen a temple. Okay, so we share some common history. And then you come over, and then we're going to really talking business. Right? Now, of course, India has a huge trade deficit with China. They're going to say, okay, this is all fine. Okay, so this is all the precursor for me to come over. You open your doors, you open your wallet. I mean, you open your airports, your visa. So now I'm coming over. So what are we talking about here? What kind of deal are you making? Because I would like to sell you stuff. No, it's okay. We keep selling you. No, I don't want a trade deficit. So they have the same issue with China. They have a huge trade deficit with China. And the thing is, China, I think China's industrial production is like 10 to 12 times more than the next country. It's a tremendous amount, right? So they need to sell the stuff out to someone. Why? Well, because the way the Chinese market works is very simple. The government says, okay, what are we going to build? Let's build real estate. Let's give loans, get everything else. So everything gets pumped up. It's not working. Let's move now. Let's go to AI, doing the same thing. Robots, doing the same thing. So these people are constantly working to produce, but someone needs to buy it, because if no one buys it, and this is where you have to be very careful, because if tomorrow no one buys it, what is the population going to do? They're going to say to the premier in Chinese, hey, I'm not working. Because now people are losing their job in China because they cannot sell to the U.S., which is a huge market for China. It's like 15%. And that's what the U.S. administration has. It says, if we can't agree, then I'm not buying. And if I'm not buying, your people are not going to be happy because they will lose their job. Because you could make a whole bunch of things, but if no one is buying, what are you going to do? Someone needs to buy your stuff. And if no one is buying, so no one buys, people get upset, people get restless. They need to find a bad guy. Be careful, because, this is what happened with Japan. The tensions move up, it goes up. And then before you know it, the government says, you know what, it's the fault of the U.S. and Taiwan. Let me get into Taiwan. And then you need a reason to start the war without being guilty. And then the U.S. does something. And before you know it, you have a war. It has started. Not all trade deficits are bad, says Arctic. There are others variable in the equation. Probably the administration need to focus on that. Well, no, 15 rupees, 17. Yeah, that's not much. No, all not trade deficits are bad. They're not bad. It's just that when you have a trade deficit with a country, that means that you are importing more than you're exporting. So that means they're making something else for you. Well, if they're making shoes and sneakers and t-shirts, you don't mind. But once they make your antibiotics, your vaccine, your medication, okay, no, you okay, fine. Let's keep going then. The semiconductors. So the problem is a trade deficit, and that's the fault of the U.S. Really. 50% of printed circuit boards come from China. All the iPhone comes from China. Computer chips, lithium battery, 80% come from China. 70 to 80% of API, active pharmaceutical ingredients. 100% of antibiotics come from China. It's a situation, and this is where I'm saying that you have to be careful, because how it could impact you. Because if the tension mounts and these people are locking them into each other, and obviously China doesn't mind come over, knowing the tension that's going to build, you could have some kind of conflict. You could have some potential war. If there's a war with China, you are not in the U.S. getting your antibiotics anymore. Carlton says tariffs have to be specialized to protect the local manufacturers and industrial development independence. There are multiple ways, says Arctic, to boost the economic confidence, but focusing on mole and leaving the elephant to address, I think that's what's happened now. Yes. These are all very good points. And I think that and I think if one thing the administration is probably not doing well, but I don't know what else they could do. I mean, if you don't have the tariffs, you want to negotiate? You know how many years it's going to take for negotiation? They've been negotiating. Biden's been negotiating with India. Yeah, where did they get us? Didn't get the U.S. too far. So it's taking too long. Now, of course, the mistake that all these people are making, even Modi is making that mistake. Maybe you should get your farmers out of the fields and get them out and do something else, so you're not highly dependent, so you could bring the U.S. in. No, okay. Well, then if you don't want to do that because you don't want to lose your job, then you're going to keep it going. And the other thing is the administration. Trump is 79 years old. He doesn't have 10 more years, 3 years, whatever, 4 years until the end of administration. That's it. Yes, valid points. I agree. You need to understand the world that you're living in. That is a point of this channel, by the way. I want you to understand, because the problem is that you're not giving the exact news, right? If I'm looking at the quote-unquote news right now, right? What are they telling you? Well, I know. Let's take a look at FT, for example, right? And FT basically says that because they're covering what's going on right now. Right now, they're all over in China, right? I mean, that's a main title, right? Xi to host Putin and Modi as China presents rival front to the U.S. Or you want them to have a fight, right? First Indian PM visit in 7 years. That's because of the U.S. administration. It's your fault. What else? I don't know. I mean, I guess you could negotiate more as opposed to give 50% tariff. That's true. But they've been negotiating for quite some time with Modi. Okay, it's not like the U.S. administration suddenly decided, hey, you know what? Get him out. No, they've been negotiating for a while, but frankly, it hasn't done well. They could not. They could not agree. They were having issues. The U.S. wants a broad market access. They want IP. They want tariff reductions, and the U.S. is very protective. In 2024, the U.S.-India trade negotiations have run into repeated deadlocks because both sides have deep structural disagreement. Agricultural and dairy access. Washington has pressed New Delhi to open its dairy, poultry, and agricultural market. No. Steel and steel and aluminum. India sought exemption from tariff on steel. Don't charge me the steel. I can't do it. This is security. U.S. runs a large trade deficit with India. I need to reduce my trade deficit with you. U.S. plunged for strong IP protection, e-commerce liberalization, and free digital data flows. And of course, that didn't help. Yes, I agree that the Trump administration new tariffs on Indian goods have hardened India's negotiating stance. India felt pressured, leading to cancellation. There was some late August talk. They canceled. They said, "No, forget you. I'm going to go to China instead." So that's the situation that they are facing right now. They're having some issues getting around the talks, and you know who was involved? Obviously, Vince was the one, the vice president was the one that they were there, and they were in late August. They were around, supposed to be in New Delhi, scheduled for August 25th to the 29th, was called off and canceled, delaying progress on the proposed trade agreement. So the U.S. and the China and India are not talking. Multiple outlets reported the U.S. delegation visit was scrapped amid the tariff dispute, and a new date has not been set. And the cancellation came just days before the August 27th, where the 50% went up. This is serious. This is actually happening. They're having a 50%, and the U.S. is not talking to the U.S. I mean, they had 4 days. So how did they negotiate, right? In June 2025, there was a 4-day negotiation round in June 2025, right? Senior official from the U.S. and India's trade ministry held a 4-day negotiation in New Delhi. We went to see you. They made significant progress towards a bilateral trade agreement. They aim for an interim deal by the end of that month, although agriculture and dairy remain major sticking point. That's what it is, the agriculture. India offered lower tariffs on high-value U.S. nuts, but they want exemption on steel tariffs. They want to, and the U.S. said no. We need to make we need to concentrate on making steel in the U.S., which we're not. Okay. Then, during the visit earlier in 2025, J.D. Vance and Modi finalized the term of reference or trade negotiation. You know, more doubling the bilateral trade to 500 billion by 2030. There were 5 rounds of BTA talks. In July, they came back. There was 5 rounds of more discussions. They talk in June. They talk in July. In April, Vince and Modi unveiled a roadmap. So again, there was more discussion in April, June, July, right? In the same time, there were preliminary framework agreement in April. But I think what has been happening, Modi was trying to play both sides at the same time, and he yesed them to death, but he wasn't going to prove anything. And I think the U.S. saw through it, and they say, you know what, this is not happening. They are keen to be overprotective of farmers who will lose. Yes. So what do you do? What do you do? I mean, you have to do something, right? You got to deal. We got to deal with each other. You got to deal with each other. Otherwise, that's going to be a problem. And right now, that is exactly what is happening. And that's and because right now, they are all over in China. And they're talking, and the concern is that this becomes more and more of a situation. Now understand that while they may sound very friendly, they have fought many wars together. Is Modi doing the right thing for his people? Well, we shall see. Is Trump doing this? It looks like they have conflicting interests. Now, I don't think these interests are new. Talking agriculture, it can't be understated how much of the world food supply relies on Ukraine. They have some of the highest concentration of black soil. Yeah. And Ukraine, unfortunately, in this situation is a bit of a problem because there's a war there, and you're not going to stop it. Obviously, as you could see, it's a shame, but yes, it's actually requirement like as its own so as India. What's wrong with this is hypocrisy since too tiny to trade. I think the issue that I'm seeing right now with Ukraine is the fact that Trump was not able to negotiate with Putin. So Trump is not able to talk to Putin. The administration is not able to talk to India, and the administration is not able to talk to China. Everything is being delayed or canceled or not listened to. I mean, China, they gave it 90 days. India not talking anymore, and Russia talking past each other. It's over. I don't think that the U.S. has lost that position, has lost, those three countries. It's going to be those three countries versus the U.S. And then all they need to do is close the doors and they could trade with each other. You don't need the U.S. That's going to be a problem. And of course, the U.S. has tried the, not over yet. Well, listen, you have, they're all together right now. Let's put it this way. China is not really talking to it. They're talking to the U.S., but they haven't agreed to anything, so they postponed for 90 days. That's one. Two, Russia is talking past the U.S. They met, they talk, they hugged, but frankly, he's going to do what he's going to do, and he doesn't fear the consequences. And obviously, the U.S. administration has no control over him. Three, India, they're not talking. So you're not talking to all three of them because they're talking to each other. That means that the deal is set. That means the next step is they're going to consolidate. Right now, if you're in the U.S., you should be very concerned what they're talking behind closed doors. Besides the fanfare, then the show and the singing and all that, you should be very worried as to what's going on and what kind of deal they're making right now. Don't forget, these countries have enough people, right, to buy from each other, and you don't need to sell to the U.S. You don't want to close this, and they have to be careful because you might be surprised who would start a war. Because if tomorrow China says, well, I'm not sending you any more antibiotics, what is the U.S. willing to do? Are you going to do like Japan? Because then you just need a reason to get into each other. That's what's happening. Right? The tension is building. And that's why this could be very important for you, because you do not want... China is still about equality, but India is not like that. There are a lot of things which happen behind doors. Yeah, of course. It may not be over, but it's damn close. This is the second time around for China. Yes. They're trying to get China. David Z is trying to get, says that it may not be over yet, but it's damn close. This is the second time around for China. Well, it may be damn close, but I don't think they're going to get, again, they need each other, but they're not willing to give up anything. So when is enough, right? So that's what we are going to see. And that's what we are going to decide. And this is what we need to wait for. Right? Okay, so what we are going to do next. How many of the U.S. import from China decreased in recent months? They've gone a lot. They've decreased a lot of imports from China. And the Chinese don't like that very much. For example, the rare earth mineral drive-by was down 97% at the beginning of the year. It's down to 50% this year. It hasn't recouped because they don't want to share. And trading directly with new partners. Yeah, Canada and Mexico. Well, yeah, and I'll do a video on that. That Canada, for example, is trying to find other means to trade. They want to go around the U.S. The U.S. is being isolated more and more. That is a concern. That is a big concern. And you could see when these people are talking to each other, they're not talking to you. That's a concern. And I think that what's going to happen, they're going to get closer and closer. And before you know it, they're going to close the doors and the U.S. is going to find itself with, Mexico. And since you don't make a lot of the things you're supposed to need to keep going, that's going to be a lot of damage. Okay, my friends. So we'll see you next. I got a bunch of show for all next week, and we're going to keep track of all that situation.